Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I am your host, John Henson, and today, what are we talking about? I gotta get my computer screens right. Why am I not prepared for my own show? This is a good start. I should just start over, but I'm not gonna, because today we're starting a two-part series on some serial killers from the United States, because God knows we got plenty to choose from, as we have done so through 220 some episodes so far. But got three more for you today, and then I'll have three more for you next week. This week, we are looking at the stories of Phillip Jablonski, Juan Corona, and our first story will be of the Harpe Brothers.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
God, that's just the most adorable. I love it so much. Anyway, Joshua and William Harper were born in the 1760s in Orange County, North Carolina, to some Scottish parents. Orange County, where Chapel Hill is, that kind of area, if you need a geographic reference. Some records indicate that the two boys were cousins rather than brothers, and actually immigrated from Scotland themselves in the early 1760s. Regardless of what happened, thanks to their parents' initial loyalties to the British Crown, the Harpers grew up in the area highly persecuted by their old patriot USA neighbors, right? In 1775, the Harpers moved up to Virginia to work as overseers on a slave plantation. Joshua traveled with sisters Susan and Betty Roberts, who both gave him children. So this dude, he's got the riz, as the kids would say. When the Revolutionary War broke out, the Harpers then returned to North Carolina and joined a Tory rape gang, taking advantage of the lawlessness brought about by the war. The Tories, I don't know. I think they were the British sympathizers during the Revolutionary War, and apparently there were just gangs of them that would go around raping people. So that's probably not okay. The group also targeted Patriot colonists by raping, stealing, murdering, and burning their property all around North Carolina. Well, despite being loyal to the British, the group was treated as a volunteer militia and was never paid or given supplies or outfits by the British. And by 1781, following the British defeat at Yorktown, the Harpers changed their names to Micaiah and Wiley Harpe to disguise their Tory ties in North Carolina, and then fled with the Chickamauga Cherokee back to the Tennessee side of the Appalachian Mountains. And the Chickamauga Cherokee was a splinter group of, I guess, Cherokee Indians who refused to make peace with the Americans following whatever side. I don't remember enough about the Revolutionary War, you guys, because here in the South, we mostly talk about the Civil War, which is weird because that's the one we lost. You think we'd talk more about the Revolutionary War because that's the one that, we mostly won. Anyway, yay, education system. Anyway, the two brothers, they changed their names from Joshua and William to Micaiah and Wiley, and go from Harper to Harpe, which, again, you did great on the first name, and then you got so lazy on the second name. Just like, man, we got to change our names. We got these cool first names. What should we do with our last name? Man, I tell you what's going to throw them off the scent. Let's just drop that second R off our name. Instead, Harper will be Harpe. Ain't nobody gonna know the difference. Come on. Anyway, they flee across the Appalachian Mountains over to Tennessee, and while in Tennessee, The Harps then fought alongside the band of Chickamauga Cherokees that they had teamed up with in battles in Nashville and Kentucky, where they defeated an army of frontiersmen who were actually led by Daniel Boone. So these guys, they're fighting Daniel Boone, king of the wild frontier. You know, all these frontiersmen coming through, taking the natives' land, and the Harps, they're fighting with the Indians. With the engines, that's probably not PC, bro. But fighting alongside them, beating dudes like Daniel Boone, so they're legit, right? Over the next 13 years, the Harps lived with the Chickamauga Cherokee near Chattanooga, where they kidnapped Maria Davidson and Susan Wood, who was a daughter of a Patriot captain. Wiley went on to marry another woman named Sarah Rice, and then the brothers both shared Sarah and Maria Davidson as wives, which is crazy, right? Because like earlier on, you had Joshua Harp, who was now either Micaiah or Wiley. I don't know why I didn't just decide to make that distinction, but he got two sisters pregnant back in 1775, and then now he's in Tennessee, and he's like, they're just wife swapping with his brother. So like him and his brother and or cousin, they're super close, and they're just swapping wives back and forth. Very progressive for the late 1700s. By 1797, the Harps were living near Knoxville, continuing to steal food and supplies from local pioneers. And then, following an accusation of stealing hogs and horses, the Harps just decided, all right, well, look, if you think we're just such terrible people, we're going to truly be terrible people. And they go on this massive killing spree. It started when the body of a man named Johnson was found in a river covered in urine. His chest cavity had been opened up and filled with stones. Like, they massacred this dude and then peed on him, which is so stupid. From there, the Harps fled north to Kentucky, where they murdered a man named Peyton and stole his supplies. Also, I'm still hung up on being covered in pee. Why don't more serial killers do that? Right? Like, we've seen sometimes, like, I know we talked about Richard Chase, who stuffed dog poop down the throat of one of his victims. Most of them just jizz all over their victims because it's a sex thing. Not enough serial killers peeing on their victims. And I get it, you can't do it now because that's just all the DNA evidence, right? But like, man, in the days before forensic science, there was a huge opportunity for just some real degenerate dudes to pee all over. And look, maybe they did, and police just didn't add that detail to the crime report because there was just so much other heinous stuff going on. But God, man, I don't know why I think that's so fun. Like, you kill a person and just go ahead and pee on them. Like, it's not going to make it worse. You've already done a terrible thing. Just go ahead and pee on them. Try to shoot it up their nose or something. Why am I going there? I don't know. That's just where my head's at. I think just a big missed opportunity here in the history of serial killers to, I don't know, just turn it, gamifying the death of an innocent person. Anyway, I feel bad. We're going to get back into the story. After murdering two more travelers from Maryland in December, the brothers then murdered a guy named John Langford in Kentucky. This time, though, the Harps were captured for Langford's murder and thrown in jail in Danville, Kentucky. Unsurprisingly, though, the Harps escaped jail because old-timey frontier jails were super lax on security, probably because they were just manned by a constantly sleeping security guard who slept super close to the jail cell with a big old skeleton key dangling off of his pants that they were just easily able to undo from his belt loop while he slept. You get it. Cartoons. While a posse was out trying to catch them again, the Harps murdered the son of one of the men who had helped authorities catch them in the first place. So that's just a big FU to that posse, right? Near Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, the Harps then killed a young black man by bashing his head against a tree. On April 22nd, 1799, Kentucky Governor James Gerard, or maybe it's Gerard, it's probably Gerard, placed a $300 reward for the capture of each Harpe brother. That didn't really bother the Harpes, who then continued north and murdered 5 more men between Kentucky and Illinois. The brothers then traveled to Cave in Rock, which is a natural formation on the Ohio River, I think on the border between Kentucky and Illinois. And while they were there, they met Samuel Mason, who was a notorious river pirate on the Ohio River. Even Mason's gang, though, which had built a reputation for ruthlessly preying on flatboats traveling along the river, thought that the Harpes were a bit much. You know, it's like the Harpes come in, it's just like, yeah, Mason, we're going to join your gang. Let's rape and pillage, maybe pee on some people. I don't know. And let's own this river. And the gang is just like, yeah, I mean, look, sometimes we'll kill people, but we're not going to pee on them. Like, that's rude. That's so rude to desecrate a body by peeing on them. What's wrong with you guys? And so, anyway, whereas Mason's gang just robbed the boats, the Harpes, when they kind of joined this gang for a brief period, the Harpes would just take travelers to the top of this rock formation, which is, several feet high. I mean, a couple dozen, if not, 50 or more. They would take their newfound prisoners off of these boats traveling down the river. They would take them to the top of the rock formation above the cave, strip them naked, and then just push them off the top of the cave and let them fall to their deaths because it's just rock, hard rock down below. And if they're tied up and they're naked, and then you just push somebody off of a 50-foot cliff to rock below, jagged rock in a lot of places, that's going to kill them. And then maybe the Harpes stood on the edge of the rocky cliff and peed over the side of the cliff and tried to hit their squashed victims with their pee. I don't know why I'm so hung up on that detail. So Mason's gang, that's too much for them. So after Mason kindly asked the Harpes to leave, the brothers bounced between Tennessee and Kentucky, where they killed 3 more people in July of that year, 1799. The Harpes then murdered and disemboweled William Ballard, slashed the throat of James Brassel, and then decapitated John Graves and his son with an axe. The Harpes then murdered John Tully, a young girl, a young slave, and an entire family just camping out in the Kentucky wilderness. In August, Micaiah Harpe got so annoyed by his own infant daughter's incessant crying that he bashed her head against a tree, killing her, which is wild, right? Because look, Finn cries and it gets annoying, but at no point, thankfully, and I can say this honestly, at no point have I ever looked at him and then also looked at a tree or a wall or the floor or anything and thought, that was a good solution. So I feel good about not being that much of a psychopath. Later that month, in August of 1799, a disemboweled man was found in Highland Creek, Kentucky. The brothers then murdered an entire family who had already just nicely given them shelter when they had come in and asked for it. So that was rude. On August 24th, 1799, the Harpes were finally tracked down by another posse who was mad about one of the other murders at this point. When the brothers tried to run away, Micaiah was shot in the leg and back. And then after a brief scuffle, the posse leader, John Leeper, wrestled Micaiah to the ground. Seeing that this was the end for him, Micaiah confessed to 20 murders before Moses Stiegel, whose wife and child had been killed by the Harpes, came over and decapitated Micaiah while he was still conscious. Dude chopped this guy's head off alive. And he probably deserved it. I hope he peed on him. He probably didn't, but God, it would have been funny if he did. Micaiah's head was then impaled on a pole at a prominent crossroads somewhere in Kentucky. Meanwhile, Wiley Harpe had escaped the posse and fled back to the Mason gang at Cave in Rock. Harpe lived peacefully for the next 4 years with the gang before they were all rounded up and arrested. However, Samuel Mason, the gang leader, and Harpe, who was using an alias at the time, eluded capture, despite Mason getting shot during the escape. Once things settled down, once they thought they were away and safe from everything, Harpe and another of Mason's gang members, Peter Alston, actually killed Mason and then went back to police to try to claim the reward. When Harpe and Alston presented Mason's head, a civilian recognized the two men as the outlaws that they were, and then they were quickly arrested. Although they soon escaped from jail, obviously, they were quickly recaptured, tried, and sentenced to death. Harpe and Alston were both hanged in January 1804. Both of their heads were then cut off, impaled on stakes, and then placed along the Natchez Trace as a warning to other outlaws. Natchez Trace, kind of the Blue Ridge Parkway of the Deep South. Although the Harpes confessed to a total of 39 murders, the true number may be more than 50. But also, what's going on out in Kentucky and Tennessee where we're just, impaling dudes' heads on stakes and just putting it out there for the world to see? Oh, what a time to be alive in the 1800s. Anyway, our next story here is of Phillip Jablonski, who was born on January 3rd, 1946 in Joshua Tree, California. His story, though, really doesn't begin until 1966 when he enlisted in the Army and went off to fight in the Vietnam War. 2 years later, in 1968, he returned to the States and married Alice McGowan, his high school sweetheart. Unfortunately, though, because he just saw so much stuff in Nam, bro, he turned violent, often putting a pillow over Alice's head and trying to suffocate her while the two had sex, which, speaking from experience, all right, guys, I've had sex 3 times, and that's definitely not how you do it. Typically, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, pillows not usually involved in sex. So I don't know what Jablonski's doing, but that's not how you do it. So Alice divorced him later that year, and he quickly met Jane Sanders. After raping her on their first date, which again, that's not really how you're supposed to do it, all right? I've gone on a couple of first dates in my lifetime. Never raped someone on the first date, all right? Again, that's just typically not how you do it. In my experience, all right, a first date typically consists of you and your date sitting across from each other pretty awkwardly, trying to find something to talk about. Granted, I'm not great in social situations. There's probably better ways to go about doing that. And that's probably why I didn't get married until I was in my 30s. But I'm pretty certain that rape on a first date, not how you're supposed to do it. Second date, I don't know. All right. I don't know where the rules change on that, but I'm kidding, of course. Anyway, despite that, though, Jane sticks around. The two get into a relationship. They move back to California and have a child together. Every time that Jane and Jablonski wrapped up having sex, Jablonski was like, nah, we're not done. And he would threaten to shoot her if she didn't continue making the sex with him. On one occasion, he actually knocked her out with the butt of his gun and continued to have sex with her unconscious body, which, again, look, I'm not an expert, you guys, all right? But I've 3 times I think is enough to figure this out. One, guns not really necessary, not a necessary tool for making sex. All right. Secondly, you don't have sex with an unconscious body. All right. Ideally, both people involved, maybe all of them, if you're doing a group thing, everyone is awake and alert. All right. And is aware of what's going on. Jablonski, he doesn't really, I think, grasp this. All right. I don't think he truly understands how sex works because he's doing it wrong every time. Jane finally leaves him in 1972. And later that year, Jablonski raped a female acquaintance in her home while her infant child was in the room with them, which, again, ideally not how you're supposed to do it, right? Sex is one of those things that maybe children whether they are infants or of the age where they can make memories and can be mentally scarred by that, you probably shouldn't be in the room. All right. That's one of those things. Again, unless you're doing like a group thing, which if that's your thing, cool. But like typically it's two people in a room with no one else around, at least in my experience. All right. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. All right. Now, Phillip Jablonski, he's got me questioning everything. All right. I might need to have a talk with my wife. Maybe we've been doing it wrong this entire time. All right. I don't know. We'll have to have a talk. Babe, listen, I know you're listening to this. Let's talk. All right. Let's talk. All right. I've got the guns in my dresser drawer. All right. If that's what we got to do, maybe you'll just, I'll throw some sleeping pills in your whiskey and let you pass out. And then I'll wave a gun around and we'll throw Finn in the corner. Let him kind of just absorb all of it. I don't know. Maybe that's how you do it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm questioning everything. So when he gets done raping this lady with her infant child in the room, she immediately runs to a neighbor and calls police, who came right over and arrested him. Quickly convicted of rape, he's sent to prison. So in 1977, he's out of prison. He served his sentence. He tries settling down again, this time with a woman named Linda Kimball. The two had a daughter later that year. On July 6, 1978, Jablonski went over to Isabel Paul's house and woke her up, which is really random. Paul's, who was the mother of his new girlfriend, said that Jablonski told her when he woke her up that he had come over to rape her, but couldn't go through with it because he only saw Linda, her daughter, whenever he looked at her, which is wild. That is, first of all, like, it's weird that a dude would just walk up to you and be like, hey, I'm going to rape you. Or at least I was gonna, right? But I can't, because when I look at you, I just see your daughter and I can't. All right. I've already raped your daughter. It just doesn't do it for me anymore. So, God, where do we go from here? Well, where did he go? A few days later, Kimball, she found out about all this. She took the couple's daughter and left him. But on July 16th, 10 days later, Kimball briefly returned to their old apartment to grab a few remaining items that belonged to the baby. Unfortunately, Jablonski was there and he was not happy. He beat and stabbed and strangled Linda to death. He was arrested for this murder 11 days later and was given a 12-year sentence. Well, while in prison in 1982, Jablonski placed an ad in a newspaper and he met and married a woman named Carol Spadoni, who was apparently dumb enough to start a relationship with a man in prison who was in prison because he was a convicted rapist and murderer. And then, crazy enough, 3 years later, he's out on parole. And while he's out on parole, he goes back to Isabel Paul's house and tries to strangle her with a shoelace, but fails again. Probably because he keeps seeing Linda. He can't get her out of his mind. Despite that, he was still released from prison for good behavior 5 years later in 1990, because California, I don't think they understand at all how the prison system is supposed to work. There's plenty of evidence that we've covered so far on this show to back that up. Less than a year after his release, Spadoni, who had met him in prison, right, and her mother were shot to death in their home. This came a day after Phillip shot Fatima Van to death, removed her eyes and ears, carved "I love Jesus" into her back, and then tossed her into a ditch. This dude is so unhinged. Police found Jablonski 6 days later in Kansas and charged him with Fatima Van's murder, along with the robbery and murder of a woman named Marie Rogers in Grand City, Utah. At this point, Jablonski was given the death sentence, but died in his cell on December 27th, 2019, before he could be executed. Our final story here is of Juan Corona, who was born on February 7th, 1934 in Jalisco, Mexico. Jalisco, whatever. At age 16, he sneaked across the United States border in California because Trump hadn't fixed the wall yet. And why would he? It was in the 50s. Anyway, He worked as a carrot picker before moving north to Sacramento. I don't know why. Just calling someone a carrot picker sounds like a bad racial slur. Hey, come here, you carrot picker. I don't know. Where is my brain today? I felt like I got a good amount of sleep last night. And maybe this is it. Maybe I am so mentally refreshed and recharged that this is the nonsense that I'm going to come up with. Or the opposite. Anyway, you guys, I'm sorry, you guys. We'll get through this. So he moves up. He works as a carrot picker. Sounds racist, but it's not. Moves up north near Sacramento, eventually settling in the town of Marysville to reunite with his half-brother Natividad to work at a local ranch. In December 1955, a massive flood swept through the Feather and Yuba River valleys that flowed near Marysville and killed 74 people. This event traumatized Corona so much that he started seeing the ghosts of all the flood victims walking around Marysville after the waters had receded. His half-brother, Natividad, became so concerned that he had Corona admitted to DeWitt State Hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and given 23 electroshock treatments. After 3 months in the hospital, doctors declared that Corona had been cured. He wasn't. And because he was an illegal immigrant, they had him deported back to Mexico. To his credit, though, Corona then went through all the appropriate channels and returned to California legally in 1962. All right. So if you were mad about him sneaking across the border, you can't be mad at him now. All right. He did all the right things. He even got his contracting license and began frequenting seedy bars in the Marysville area to look for men to work on various fruit ranches that he was contracted to. So he's building this contracting business of day laborers, basically, and he's going to bars trying to find dudes who want to go and pick fruit. Although Corona was getting his life back together, he still had a drinking problem, which exacerbated his unfiltered hatred toward homosexuals. Where this came from, I don't know. Probably had a lot to do with the fact that his half-brother Natividad was gay, and he probably had some of his own problems to sort through, namely seeing all the flood ghosts walking around town. On February 25th, 1970, Jose Romero Raya was found in the bathroom of the cafe that Natividad owned. Raya was a bloody mess with several machete wounds, which he claimed were a result of his rejection of Natividad's sexual advances, which is crazy. Because, like, why was, if Corona was the one who had a problem with the gay people, why is the gay guy in Natividad the one stabbing all these people? Raya filed a lawsuit against Natividad and won $250,000 in damages, forcing Natividad to close the cafe and return to Mexico. Well, after another mental breakdown sent Corona back to DeWitt State Hospital, he got out, got rehabilitated again, and returned to work on a peach orchard. On May 19th, 1971, the owner of this peach farm that had contracted Corona to field workers to pick the peaches noticed that there was a brand new hole in the orchard, and then came back the next day and noticed that it had been filled. Typically, peach orchards don't require holes, so that's why this is weird. But the farmer got suspicious and called police, who came out and dug up the hole, and guess what, guys? They found a dead body. Police then began finding more holes with more dead bodies inside. One grave contained a meat receipt with Corona's signature, and two other graves revealed bank slips with Corona's name on them. Why would you be so sloppy? That was enough evidence, albeit circumstantial, to have police arrest him. While Corona was in custody, police then searched his home and found two blood-stained knives, a machete, a gun, and blood-stained clothes. They also found a list of 34 names and dates, of which 7 were part of the group that they had dug up in the peach orchard. So, assuming that this was Corona's death list, police went to work on trying to locate the other names, identify the other victims, and by the time the search was finally called off, 25 of those bodies had been found. Corona's trial began a year later, and he was eventually found guilty on all 25 murder charges. Despite receiving 25 consecutive life sentences, he was made eligible for parole after 7 years because California is just so silly. But while in prison, waiting for his appeal to go to trial, Corona was stabbed 32 times because he accidentally bumped an inmate in the hallway, which is crazy. After nearly 10 years and he had recovered from his stab wounds, Corona's case went back to trial where the conviction was upheld. He was never granted parole, thankfully, even though he asked for it 8 times. And he ended up dying on March 4th, 2019. All right, the first part of an assortment of American killers in the books. I'm so sorry about talking about peeing on dead bodies so much. I did hope, listen, I don't claim to be a sex expert, all right? Again, done it like 3 times, all right? I feel like I'm a veteran. Maybe you learned something there. I don't know how many times you guys have done it, but, you know, hopefully you learned something there. Let's, though, really make a full recap, though, and see what we learned in today's episode.
What did we learn?
Number 1, the Harpe Brothers peed on their victims and did some other stuff, but just a really very extreme, murderous band of brothers out in the frontier, may have killed up to 50 people, which is insane for that time period. Number 2, Phillip Jablonski clearly does not know how to have sex, and it finally caught up with him, and he got put in prison after killing enough people for doing it. And then number 3, Juan Corona, fully decimated by a flood, saw all the flood ghosts, and he hated gay people, even though his brother was gay, and his brother had a meltdown over it. But then Juan started killing people. Not really sure why, but he did. And that's what happened. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. Next week, we are continuing this 2-part series. Got 3 more stories for you. We're looking at the serial killer lives of Dorothea Helen Gray, Ray Copeland, and Andre Thomas. So thank you all for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends, and keep it weird.
This is a podcast